What is up, bakers? This is Blakery, baking up some steaks for you. So, Undertale, arguably one of the most culturally impactful video games ever made. It created a fandom so strong that it's even topical today, a decade later. There's been tons of merch, fanfictions, fan covers, fan art, and memes.
I'm at the soap store!
But today we're talking about what I think I can reasonably claim as one of the most important aspects of Undertale, that being the music. Now, I'm gonna get this out of the way. I don't know music theory, despite being in jazz band all 4 years of high school. At least, I'm not nearly knowledgeable enough to go into the details about it. If you want that, go binge the channel 8-Bit Music Theory. He really gets into it if you like the nerdy side of music. However, what I can do
is analyze the execution of how the music was used in the game, how the soundtrack as a whole is implemented into that gameplay and story, and how that implementation helps to elevate the game overall to provide a richer experience.
People love Undertale's music because it slaps, obviously, and people remember iconic moments like the whole build up to the Asgore fight and, well... But it goes further than that. Undertale's music is integral to the success of its story, capturing the emotional nuances and doing everything it can to leave the impact that it has garnered, as well as just being really well crafted from a logistical standpoint. I think it might make more sense if I just start talking about it, so anyway, please remember to like and subscribe and all that if you want to see more stuff like this, and without further ado, let's get into it. The first main thing that Undertale has going for it in the music department is the amount of variety and distinction of the score, at least relative to the amount of content. Okay, technically those are two things, but they're pretty related in my opinion, so I'm lumping them together. I need you to understand exactly how cracked out Toby Fox was when he made the score for this. There are 101 songs on the soundtrack ranging from a few minutes to like 30 seconds or less, and each individual song is specifically suited for an individual need, sometimes one that lasts seconds and never appears again. The only song that shows up consistently throughout the entire game, I think, is just the Wild Encounter theme. Otherwise, each area has its own theme, each boss has their own theme, there are little songs for specific individual bits and moments, and each song is tonally distinct to a significant extent. The reason why this is feasible, especially for an independent dev, is that Undertale is a relatively short game, around 7 to maybe 11 hours depending on how efficiently you get through it and how much of the content you do. Like, you could reasonably beat the game in one sitting. Because of the short runtime, there's some luxury to spread your wings a bit when it comes to making the music, making basically each minute of the game feel completely different. Of course, it's not just the fact that there are a lot of different songs for the runtime, it's that each of those songs are so distinct from each other that I wouldn't blame you for doubting that they even were from the same game. Just look at tracks like Snowden Town and Core. Right? Like, I don't know about you, but if I knew absolutely nothing about Undertale, I could probably be convinced that these were from different games. Most games typically have a very specific vibe that they're going for, and they choose the soundbox and music style to work in that specific vibe. Look at Hades, for instance. It's basically like what you would imagine ancient Greek metal would be, and it's a very unique and distinct and, frankly, awesome sound as a whole. Not necessarily one after the other. Listen, I promise I'm not throwing any shade at the composers because I sure as hell could not make something that good, and like I said, it slaps. But partially due to just the style of the game, i.e. being a roguelike that has a lot of repeated areas and battles that music gets recycled for, it can be a tad hard to differentiate certain charts. Just listen to these two, for example. They're both distinct enough to tell that they're different tracks, obviously, but like, you don't necessarily get as much of an idea of what specific kind of setting or battle a lot of the tracks are used in. It's often just very battle themes, so you're not hearing the exact same thing all the time for every single encounter. The way music is for most games is like if you had a certain group of instruments and you asked them to play a lot of different songs. They can be varied, by a lot even, but they're usually going to have a distinct sound. In general, this is good practice. It helps maintain a somewhat consistent tone, even in RPGs where there's a lot of content and varied places and whatnot. It works for what most of those games go for, especially because they tend to kind of lean on different aspects of the game and don't leverage the music as much in most places. That said, it can also potentially make a game more liable to sound a bit samey in places, or make it a bit hard to tell what theme goes to what place or what battle. Undertale has so much variation in its soundbox and orchestration that not only is it super easy to tell two different pieces apart, but it's also pretty easy to tell and remember where specifically in the game that music is for, partially because the game is short, but also because it has that degree of separation. I mean, if you've played the game even once, I defy you to not know what battle belongs to, or even, and that's not even going into the area themes. What makes all this even more impressive, to me at least, is that Toby Fox reuses melodies constantly, sometimes even when it doesn't make a ton of thematic sense, but he reorchestrates them so well and makes them sound so distinct and fitting for the situation that on your first playthrough you might not even notice that two songs have the same melody, or at least notice it in some sort of subconscious level. One that I really enjoy is Napstablook's theme, or I guess the Mad Dummy theme too, and Muffet's theme. They're the exact same melody, but there are enough additions in other sections and variation of tempo, rhythm, and the general sound as a whole that it's easy to not immediately recognize it as such. This saves time on coming up with new music while still allowing for a distinct sound. There are other motifs as well, but I'm going to talk about those in a minute. Right now we're moving on to the next element, that being timing. Timing plays a massive part of Toby Fox's game design. By timing, I mean picking exactly where music's implemented in the game. Think about other RPGs for a second, like your Pokemons, or your Octopath Travelers, or your Dragon Quest. Speaking very broadly, there are usually a few key places where the music changes. Battle encounters, like going from an area theme directly to an encounter, then a battle theme. Cutscenes, entering a new town or a major location, etc. When the situation calls for it, there's typically silence, then maybe a recurring theme used for a specific emotional instance, then maybe a transition back to whatever the previous theme was if you want to go the extra mile. This is what Octopath Traveler 1 and 2 do, rely on a lot of good ambient sounds for cutscenes just to give them a little bit more weight and maybe even a little realism compared to the art style. But when they do use the music, it's either just a lead-up music to a boss fight for whatever character you play as, or if it's a non-boss cutscene, it's usually just the same music as whatever location you're in, or maybe a separate theme that they use in multiple places when they want to capture a certain emotion. This isn't me saying that any of that is a bad thing. It's a great way to be efficient with your music. I mean, those games are massive. It's like 40 hours of playtime, at least for Octopath Traveler 2, at a bare minimum. There are 130 tracks, and almost all of the locations have a day and night theme. It's a lot. They need to be efficient where they can. But this is where I go back to Undertale and why it being a shorter game works for its style perfectly. Undertale does pretty much the same thing as a lot of RPGs do. It uses silence for dramatic and comedic effect. It introduces music for certain instances. The difference is that, as I mentioned with the variety, these instances are way more specific with way more specific songs than in most other RPGs. I mean, think about the interactions with Metaton alone. There's a scene where he's all dressed up like a princess and it starts silent to make it ominous. Then the cheesy romantic theme plays, which actually also kind of slaps, I'm not gonna lie. Then a reorchestration of the cheesy romantic theme to emphasize the quote-unquote danger of the tower room. Or in the news segment, we get the normal news theme specifically for that section, and then we get a reworking of that theme where the twist is revealed and it adds some kind of drama to it. Like I mentioned before, the use of silence and the timing of music is not unique to Undertale, but what differentiates it is how it takes advantage of all those unique tracks I talked about earlier. It's not enough to just have a lot of unique tracks, you need to use them in a way that feels more dramatic and impactful and fits the emotional context of the scene. A few more examples are when the track Raining Somewhere Else goes dead silent on a dime when Sans threatens you, when the flowy intro track gets slowly more and more discordant and out of tune when you dodge more and more bullets and he catches on that you know what his shtick is. And the whole intro to the Asgore fight is beautifully set up to the point where he literally has a separate song just for the introduction and then a separate song for the actual boss theme itself, which I think is a nice touch and emphasizes how much he cares about that timing. It's basically taking the same concept used across most RPGs and refining it to such a specific extent that it makes any scene way more impactful than it would be if there were just like one quote-unquote emotional and sad theme, for example. Okay, I've kind of alluded to this next element a few times previously because, in my opinion, this last element is one of the most crucial as to why Undertale's music helps set it above so many other games, that element being the tone. Tone is an interesting thing to analyze since it can be kind of subjective, but I'm going to do my best to explain it as objectively as possible. The tone at any given moment in the game is subject to two things: the combination of the first two factors I mentioned previously, i.e. timing and variety, and the actual composition of any given piece. So what exactly do I mean by that? Well, let's look at a couple examples. Heartbreak is Toriel's boss theme, and the first boss theme of the game. It's set up phenomenally. Toriel is super kind to the player, wants to love them and adopt them, and is haunted by all the humans that have come before and that have perished to her former husband, although we don't learn that until later. She did everything she could to make a super comforting environment, and the music of Home has already instilled a sense of coziness and warmth in the player. But as soon as the player asks to leave, it suddenly turns. The music drops out, Toriel tells us to stay and warns us that there will be consequences if we don't, and when we follow her anyway, we find out she's sealing the entrance to the underground. She's jaded from everything that's happened, from her son dying to all the humans she's seen get killed by her own ex-husband. Better to have the human be safe and resent her than have them die. However, when we refuse, she resolves to test us, to prove that we can make it out of the underground. That said, she doesn't want to kill us, and even starts purposefully missing during her fight once we get low enough health. She doesn't want them to just go die, so even if she doesn't want to, she'd rather lay down her lone life if it meant that she had some confidence that the kid would be able to survive. Her theme is called Heartbreak for a reason. It reflects this. It's clearly in a minor key, which already gears the tone more towards a negative emotion like anger and sadness, and its melody itself in terms of rhythm and intervals is reminiscent of a typical boss theme, serving as a sort of juxtaposition. It's a song reflecting how torn Toriel is over the player's fate while also still being the first big challenge of the game. Whether the player kills her or spares her, it's still a challenge, and the theme needs to reflect the gravity of that compared to what's come thus far. However, just because it is reminiscent of a typical boss theme, that doesn't mean that it is. In that section, it has the punchiness and resolution that a typical boss theme might have rhythmically, but sound-wise, it's clearly not trying to be imposing or threatening. You can hear the sadness behind it. There are also some parts near the beginning that have choral elements in the background, adding to the element of lamentation. The one thing that throws it off is this part in the middle, where it modulates to a major key, You wouldn't expect this to be in there, but it potentially serves as a metaphor for the silver lining, in my opinion at least. It reflects the chance that you can find a way out of this, where you can both live, and it reflects Toriel's hope that you'll end up surviving, and it reflects the love that she already has for you and the pride that she has for you even if you defeat her. The song as a whole is impactful not just because it, like I said, slaps, but because it's multifaceted and nuanced and perfectly fitting for the emotions of the situation, as well as having been properly built up, helping make the player feel conflicted and unsure of what to do in that moment. Also, since I already mentioned leitmotifs earlier, people have brought this up before, but I wanted to mention how Asgore actually shares a fragment of Toriel's theme, linking them together, as well as linking Asgore to the idea of heartbreak, since they both feel the same thing. Neither of them want to kill the player, but they both have the resolve to do so if absolutely necessary. Take a listen. Asgore's melody is slightly altered, including some space and being a bit more syncopated, mostly to fit into the 4/4 time signature as opposed to Toriel's 3/4, but you can hear the melody still there. I'm under no assumption that Toby Fox intended this, but I like to think that Asgore's melody having more space than Toriel's is reflective of how he's kind of pushed his wife away, as well as how alone he feels without her and his son. That distance represents him doing the pushing away and her leaving, while as her theme kind of remains intact, but that's just my opinion. The main difference between them is Toriel couldn't bring herself to kill the player, i.e. purposefully missing, and mercy was still technically an option, whereas Asgore's mercy isn't an option at all, at least not immediately. He's still incredibly resolved to kill the player, especially since it's the last one and he's already done it 6 times. This type of leitmotif and emotional nuance is one of the hallmarks of Toby Fox's musical style in his games. That said, the absolute best example of this sort of emotional impact I can think of is the titular track of Undertale. This is the song that plays in the lead up to the Asgore fight, except for in the genocide route, but we're not talking about that right now. where basically every single monster that you've seen thus far encounters you and explains the lore of Azrael and why specifically the king wants to break the barrier. Everything about this sequence is masterfully constructed. The piece starts with some simple acoustic guitar playing a vamp of a very familiar melody. This style of acoustic guitar is really only used in one other place in the game, that being in the theme of home at the very beginning of the game. And where does this new guitar melody start? At the entrance to the castle, which is the exact same as the ruins because Toriel built her home there to look the same. The music is linked together just like the visuals to give the player a visceral reaction of the link between the two and the first inkling of who Asgore really is. Because of the limited use of it, the acoustic guitar provides that distinction and the tone is uniquely warm and fuzzy. It serves to help create a strong feeling of nostalgia that's further served by the environment. The identical rooms, the crumpled recipes for butterscotch pie, and nobody can forget the mirror moment. In addition, after a short while, the title melody also comes in with a counter melody, adding to the nostalgia and the piano blending beautifully with the guitar. Just think about it for a second. The song, paired with this setting, makes you feel nostalgic for something that essentially happened 7 hours ago, assuming you don't take a super long break, but honestly, if you did, that would just kind of hit even harder, I think. This surprising nostalgia would still be there without the music, but it would be significantly weaker without this sort of kind of backdrop behind it. As the player gets the keys and moves on to the next section, the music drops out of it, changing to another segment of the title melody with a different orchestration, creating a sad and wistful environment as the monsters reveal exactly how Azrael died. It still feels nostalgic, but less in a warm and cozy way, and more in a way that helps aid the player in empathizing with something that didn't happen to you or anybody you know directly, which I think is pretty impressive, even if most people are naturally sympathetic. It then moves on to the final section with the reintroduction of the initial melody, this time a bit ramped up from the very beginning and steadily getting more and more amped. The monsters tell you about their hope for freedom and how happy they are, and they don't have any malice towards you. They're treating you like the sacrifice that you're supposed to be. This is when you think about the fact that this is supposed to be a song of hope for them. This is their story they're recalling. This is their hope for freedom, and it creates a massive emotional juxtaposition and conflict within the player. You know what you're going to do, and they know what you're trying to do, and you seeing their hope firsthand, knowing that you either have to crush said hope or be sacrificed to allow it to come true is sick. The song then transitions to a key change, just kind of further emphasizing that hope as one final build-up, and before at the very end dropping out and ending with some quiet piano. You truly have to see it in its entirety to understand just how impactful it is, and I would recommend playing the game just to see that moment to literally anybody, if by some miracle there are people out there who haven't played it by now. And it gets even crazier when you realize later that this guitar melody is the exact same as the melody of his theme, him being, you guessed it, Azrael. We've been hearing it throughout the story without even realizing that it was his theme. You know why? Because he is the underground. He is the game. He's the entire impetus for the current chain of events. The story of Undertale is the story of Azrael at the end of the day, which is why those melodies are included in the places that they are. Of course, you won't realize this on your own unless you play through the pacifist route, but it's still just such a phenomenal choice, and there's a reason why it made such an impact on so many. This is a combination of the tone of the composition itself, the timing of when the different sections are introduced, the perfect meshing of the music with the exposition. It's truly phenomenal, and I can think of few other moments in a game that can match that level. Each of these elements I've talked about aren't unique to Undertale. There are plenty of other games where the music is implemented with good timing, has a decent amount of variety, matches the tone of the scenes well. That said, I can think of very few games that execute all three aspects to the same degree and have them work together so well to elevate the gaming experience. It's because of the combination of these elements that Undertale's music shot it into the stratosphere in terms of quality. Would it have been a brilliant, well-written, and executed game if one of these factors was missing? I'd say so. Is the game also helped by the fact that almost every single track in the game is a banger? Absolutely. But I do think that if it was just good music tossed into the game lazily, or if Toby didn't go the extra mile to make each song sound distinct, or if there wasn't painstaking effort taken for the music to match the emotional nuances of each scene and section, I don't think that the game would have reached a similar level of acclaim. Though, who am I to say for sure? All I know is that I'm glad it did, and I'm excited to see more of what Toby Fox is going to cook up in the future. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what your favorite Undertale song and or moment is in the comments below. And I guess that's about it. So until next time, see you around, bakers.